Welcome to Conversations on Creativity and Eco-Social Change. Today I'm with Rachel Roberts, a member of the theatre collective Applespiel. Rachel, would you mind introducing yourself?
So I'm Rachel Roberts. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a theatre artist and a counsellor, living and working on the lands of the Bidjigal and Gadigal people of the Eora Nation in Sydney. I work with a theatre collective called Applespiel, which started working together in 2009, a group of 8 theatre artists who all trained together at University of Wollongong.
Rachel, your project, Return to Escape From Woomera, kind of restages a very contentious video game from 2004 that kind of described the experiences of asylum seekers to Australia. Could you tell us a little bit about how the project came about?
Performance Space in Sydney in 2018 invited us specifically to look at this game for a performance. So we'd previously been in talks with them about creating something new that kind of took on the form of live online gaming. So big competitions like League of Legends and the esports world, I guess, is what we wanted to examine by inhabiting the form of a live online game. And that's still something we're interested in. But Performance Space and Jeff Kahn, who's the artistic director of Performance Space, kind of offered us a bit of a curve and said, actually, have you heard of this game called Escape From Woomera? Could you, with your interest in esports, look at this game instead and put this on stage somehow? And because we were being offered, the chance to make a new work with the limited funding that independent work can get, we jumped at that and thought it would probably be super interesting, and it was. I think we had 4 weeks to make the show. We were given some rehearsal space support and some tech support. We spoke to quite a few people who had been in detention centres, either more recently in, say, Villawood, but also to people who'd been in Woomera or the detention centres being referenced in the game. Had a lot of conversations, and I wouldn't say arguments, but kind of sticky conversations about who are we to be making this show? Who are we to be looking at these issues? And kind of again and again, we would come back to this is not a perfect way to look at these issues. The 4 of us who are kind of represented in the show as Applespiel, we are all, white Australian artists who, as I said before, benefit hugely from colonialism. But in a way, a lot of the stories are not ours to be telling. Some of the stories are, because these are policies that were put in place by a largely white Australia. These are policies that we benefit from. They're from governments that either we or our parents or our grandparents have voted for. There is a white obligation to look at this part of our history and this part of our present. We do have, I guess we kind of consider it now as an obligation, whilst also wanting it to not be myopic. So wanting to speak to people who have more experience and to have them involved in the show in a way that gives them as much agency as maybe we can, or as much agency as we could come to in that 4-week rehearsal period, where they are invited on the panel in the show. And hopefully the way we've set that up for them allows them to speak their mind as much as they can, though I understand that doesn't always feel safe. But yeah, I think we do have a white guilt that we want to use in an active way.
Rachel, thanks for sharing those really deep and, quite uncomfortable reflections about how the event was put together. In our project, we're really interested in thinking about how creative practice makes change, and I'm really interested in this technique that you've used of looking back. Could you tell me a little bit about what it meant to look back on the game for you?
Yeah, looking back on the game, so on Escape from Woomera, and seeing how I don't even know if influential is the right word, because I wasn't tapped in at the time. I was, an early teen, and I don't think I ever heard of the game until Jeff Kahn mentioned it to us. But it was one of the first depictions that Australians got of what it was actually like inside a detention centre, and it was a game. Like, it wasn't an undercover journalism expose, even though there were undercover journalists involved in the game. Yeah, it's pretty incredible, but I feel like it kind of hammers home again and again this feeling of like, the art we make isn't going to change anything. It might have some impact on the way someone thinks about something, but it will never be enough. Like, it can't, and that's not art's fault. Art does what art can. The systems that we are trying to change, or that we want to change with our art, are too resistant to being transformed. It's very easy to kind of get disheartened by thinking, well, there's this huge issue and I want it to change, and I have this expressive tool that helps me connect to other people and help people connect to each other, and hopefully even provide new perspective and create actionable ways forward. But it will never be enough. It will never be enough to create mass change. We had one of our guests on the panels was Caroline Wake, who's a theatre lecturer at UNSW, University of New South Wales, and her research is about theatre and history. I think Simon even brought this up to her on one of the panels, and her reflection was that making a work about something that speaks to you like this, about a political urgency, it probably won't change anything, but it is still important. It is part of the historical record, so that we can look back and see, oh, in this year, X% of the art being made in the independent sector was about refugee policy. At this time, it was something that people were concerned about and wanted to talk to other people about and wanted to explore in a way that captured feeling and thought. And I can see the use in that. I can see the importance in that. I still get frustrated as an artist when I want things to change and have to grapple with the limitations of my influence. I mean, in the sections where we'd invite the audience to reflect on things, we would have audience members who remembered going to rallies in 2002, 3, 4, and really thinking like, there are so many people here marching today. This has got to change. This will change. This is outrageous. This is such a violation of human rights. And their kind of disillusionment now, like 16, 17 years later, in the audience of a show where we're, going through all these policies that have not changed, that have become worse. The distance between the Australian public and what's going on in our detention centres has just become greater and greater. And I guess having that sit in the room, that I was so hopeful that this would change, and all these years later it has not. I mean, there's links there to how people look at climate science in art or in activism, and all these other things where you are confronted with with how little power you have, and with how resilient these structures are to not be adapting in the way that we feel that they should be.
Yeah, I'm really just deeply moved by what you shared there, and thinking about what it means for the creative practice to transform. So that Escape from Woomera was kind of a key moment in the development of serious games, but for the kind of cause itself not to change and arguably to have got worse is a really sort of, this question of kind of what gets transformed and how, and what systems are tractable. And as you rightly reflect, for us, sustainability is a really core concern, and kind of how to change quickly in the face of massive global systems. It's a really sort of chastening set of reflections. I'd love to ask you to tell us a little bit more about what the experience was like. What was it like to kind of be in the room, kind of playing the game?
When the audience comes into the space, they're led to some seats and on the stage space in front of them. So we do, I don't think haven't done it in a kind of traditional theatre space before. So we are sharing a space with the audience, though there is a delineation of stage through the lights and through the setup. There is a panel that is at the start, just has Nathan and Simon on it, who are two performers from Applespiel. And on the other side of the stage of the panel, there is a gaming setup. So there's a kind of plinth or platform with a computer and a light and a chair and some big headphones. Myself and Emma McManus, who's the other Applespiel performer, are helping the audience get situated. And Solomon Thomas, who is our sound and light and game tech, who does everything that we do, is there controlling the rest of the experience. We start with an acknowledgement of country, which is a kind of extended acknowledgement, because a lot of the things we talk about in the show are things that have happened, sometimes in very similar ways, to the Indigenous peoples of the land that we're on. And everything that we talk about in the show in terms of human rights and freedom and being able to connect with family, these are all things that are ongoing issues for Indigenous peoples in this land of Australia. We remind the audience again of the content and that they can leave whenever they want to, and then invite people to play the game. So there is a kind of plinth off to the side that has some numbered tokens, and audience members are welcome to, or they're invited to take a token, which is their place in the queue to play the game. And then the panel starts. So Simon and Nathan address the audience, bring on our guests. Each night we tried to have one guest with lived experience of being a refugee and one guest who was an academic or activist or in some other way connected to refugee processing or rights or issues in Australia. And that's a whole nother, I guess, challenge, is to find people with lived experience to basically recount their trauma for us, a mostly white audience, and a group of performers who are also extremely benefit from colonialism in Australia and from all these policies that have been put in place. And so then the evening kind of starts in a flow of someone's playing the game. While the game is being played, the panel led by Nathan and Simon will bring on the guests, talk to our guests, discuss some issues that are brought up in the game, talk through some of the history of the game, check in with the game, kind of as like, not quite as sports commentators, but bringing our attention to certain things that are happening on the screen, because there's a big screen that's kind of the focal point then on the stage. And whenever a player loses the game, we do a little bit of a post-play interview with them about how that experience was for them. I mean, it's difficult because it's never going to be a pleasant experience for an audience, but we do want it to be challenging in a kind of active way, and we want it to be informative, and we want it to be, I feel like inspiring is the right word, but the feeling of being inspired is not the right feeling I'm going for, of like inspired to be more informed or inspired to examine their position on something. That's what we're hoping for the audience, and that doesn't have to be pleasant to get to that outcome. But we are very aware of the consequences of sitting with heaviness for a long time.
Your practice is clearly so reflective. Just even what you've said about kind of being aware of the emotional register of people in the room. And I wondered kind of how you learn and reflect about your work. Do you have any kind of processes in place, kind of when you're making your work or when you stage it multiple times? How do you kind of gather together that learning to change kind of the next iteration?
Part of the conversation of arts making, particularly in Australia, because our criticism of landscape, our landscape of criticism and review and response to theatre and to art is so thin right now. Like funding for arts writing and arts criticism has just been completely stripped. There are incredible arts writers who do fantastic, thoughtful criticism and critique of work that's out there. They're not getting paid enough, and they're certainly not getting paid enough to do that as their job, or as their main job. So we have a few reviews, not many, certainly not all positive either, that we definitely read and try to learn from to understand what and why someone thought of our work the way they did. We talk to audience members. In the development process, we are always doing, when I work with games in another group called Boho, what we do is what we call it play testing, of testing a game with an audience. And so we do the same thing with the live theatre, of bringing in a select group of people, letting them know what kind of feedback we're looking for. So that might be letting them know what stage we're at in the process. Are we looking for some really broad, like, what did you see? What did you hear? What sense did you get from it? Or are we looking for some really specific feedback on timing or on how smooth the interaction was, or some technical stuff around being an audience member and then playing the game and then reflecting on the game? So we did that a couple of times, which was incredibly useful. And because we are fortunate to have a network of other artists as our peers and our friends, having people in who know us and can reflect on what they think we're trying to achieve and how we might achieve it better is so useful, so useful. We had Pascal Berry as our dramaturg, who is an artistic director, and artists come into the room and kind of help us with, what's the picture on stage that we're making and how's that being translated to the audience? What are they getting from it? And Jeff Kahn and other staff from Performance Space coming in as well to look at what we've made and reflect back on it. So we don't ever want to make work in a vacuum, because we'll just make something terrible. But there's also a balance of, we would have people come to see a showing who might reflect on, hearing this from 4 white people is really uncomfortable. I don't feel like I'm getting enough of the voice of the people who have been through it. To which we would be like, yeah, I agree. We've been asked to make it and we're being paid to make it, and I need to pay my rent. That's a part of it. That's an uncomfortable part of it. And then having to kind of find our way to the position that I think we're in now, of us feeling a responsibility to engage with this work regardless, that there is a space for a white reflection on these issues.